A warm morning, good morning to you from here in the UK anyway, in London, where Justin and I are. We're very happy to be back, even though we've been in a technical kerfuffle for the last 20 minutes of it, trying to sort this out. We think that YouTube have changed Facebook have changed some of their permissions and settings, which means that we, at the moment, can't broadcast into a group as Justin and Lizzie. So we wonder about how we're going to fix that. But for now, we are going to continue with our source, which is chosen by Justin today, and which is very beautiful. I have to read it 100 times, one for me. And I'm also feeling very tender this morning and feeling like I'm in need of some of this for myself, genuinely. And I obviously always am, but just particularly this morning, this is really important to me around obstacles, this inquiry about what we make things into by having them be what they are. So I'm really grateful to be here and want to just say welcome to everybody again, and I'm looking forward to getting into this.
So good morning, everyone, from me as well. Anyone who's coming to this recording later and didn't manage to catch up with us live may not know how many technical difficulties we've had this morning, and to be reading this piece about obstacles seems to me immediately very timely. I'm so glad to be back here doing this with you, Lizzie, and with everyone else. And I wanted to say a little bit about how come this source this week. So 2 things before we read it. One is, over the last 18 months or so, I've become a very dedicated swimmer. And a very dear friend of mine and of ours, of Third Space, sent me this poem when she found out how important swimming had become to me. And it's definitely true that as a practice, for me, swimming is one of those practices that dissolves the sense of being right up against obstacles in life. I can be in the midst of who knows what. And often, I'm sure we'll get into this, this poem is powerful for me because of the way whatever habits of mind I have make obstacles that are facing me right now into enduring, this is going to last the whole of my life. The whole of my life is going to be shaped by this particular thing and my inability to deal with it, all of that. And I know about swimming that it's one of the ways in which that dissolves, that when I get into the water, my sense of separation from everything dissolves pretty quickly, particularly if I swim, do outdoor swimming in ponds and things, which I've been doing. So that's a big part of bringing this poem. But the other part of it, I think, is what I've already started to say is, I think this is such an important topic, which is what happens when we get thwarted, what happens when we get afraid, what happens when something in front of us, the way that we tell stories about it to ourselves maps out a known future, as if this was a point in our own history and maybe in wider history where we know what's happening. And I know that I so need sources, people, wisdom in my life that helps me to see that there might be another way to see things. So that's how come this came. So shall I read it first?
Mm-hmm.
Why not? The poem is by Alison Luterman. It's called Because Even the Word Obstacle is an Obstacle. Try to love everything that gets in your way. The Chinese women in flowered bathing caps, murmuring together in Mandarin, doing leg exercises in your lane while you execute 36 furious laps, one for every item on your to-do list. The heavy-bellied man who goes thrashing through the water like a horse with a harpoon stuck in its side, and whose breathless tsunamis rock you from your course. Teachers all, learn to be small and swim past obstacles like a minnow, without grudges or memory Dart towards your goal, sperm to egg, thinking obstacle is another obstacle. Try to love the teenage girl lounging against the ladder, showing off her new tattoo. Cette vie est la mienne, this life is mine, in thick blue-black letters on her ivory instep. Be glad she'll have to look at that the rest of her life, and keep going. Swim by an uncle in the lane next to yours who's teaching his nephew how to hold his breath underwater, even though kids aren't supposed to be in the pool at this hour. Someday, years from now, this boy who is kicking and flailing in the exact place you want to turn, to touch and turn, may be a young man at a wedding on a boat, raising his champagne glass in a toast, when a huge wave hits, washing everyone overboard. He'll come up coughing and spitting like he is now, but he'll come up like a cork, alive. So your moment of impatience must bow in service to the larger story, because if something is in your way, it is going your way, the way of all beings, towards darkness, towards light.
Mm. Try to love everything that gets in your way. The Chinese women in flowered bathing caps, murmuring together in Mandarin, doing leg exercises in your lane, while you execute 36 furious laps, one for every item on your to-do list. The heavy-bellied man who goes thrashing through the water like a horse with a harpoon stuck in its side, and whose breathless tsunamis rock you from your course. Teach us all, learn to be small, and swim past obstacles like a minnow, without grudges or memory. Dart toward your goal, sperm to egg, thinking obstacle is another obstacle. Try to love the teenage girl lounging against the ladder, showing off her new tattoo. Cette vie est la mienne. This life is mine, in thick blue-black letters on her ivory instep. Be glad she'll have that to look at for the rest of her life, and keep going. Swim by an uncle in the next lane to yours who is teaching his nephew how to hold his breath underwater, even though kids aren't supposed to be in the pool at this hour. Someday, years from now, this boy who is kicking and flailing in the exact place you want to touch and turn may be a young man at a wedding on a boat, raising his champagne glass in a toast, when a huge wave hits, washing everyone overboard. He'll come up coughing and spitting like he is now, but he'll come up like a cork, alive. So your moment of impatience must bow in service to the larger story, because if something is in your way, it is going your way, the way of all beings, toward darkness, toward light.
It's very wonderful hearing you read this, Lizzie, and I can feel my own body and emotions settle, hearing it. And this poem is so important to me, I think generally, but right now, because it's a reminder to me of how absolutely convincing my stories are about what's happening, and how little I know, really.
Yeah.
And I definitely experienced this in a swimming pool. There's a swimming pool near to us, near to where I live. It's not my favorite swimming pool to go to. And one of the reasons it's not my favorite is that they have these lane markings for swimming in different speeds, and mostly people ignore them and nobody does anything about it. So if you want to go fast, which is often how I like to go once I'm a bit warmed up, there's always somebody in the way. Either there's always somebody in the way, or I feel like I'm in the way. And it can really easily, in my mind, if I don't pay attention, if I don't take responsibility. So if I just treat what's happening as inside me as the truth, I can really easily get into a story which is very energetically powerful and very, very convincing, which is something awful is happening here. My wish to swim is being thwarted. I can't go as fast as I want to go. And then I think here's the most important bit of it. I'm mostly on it enough to get that I'm just a bit annoyed about swimming. But the mood of the world's against me, I don't have the agency to have the world shift in any way. And because of that, bad things are happening, and they're mostly my fault, or they're guaranteed, or, some version of this really easily creeps into the day and can affect so many things. And in a way, that's partly, there's one way in which a poem like this, I think, does something really important, which it says, just look at how often we take something to be a particular way, and then, like the boy who's learning how to hold his breath underwater, when you look back from a different vantage point, it turns out that something completely different was happening. So that in itself, I think, is important, and I'm really grateful for it. But this other side of it that's coming to me as we're speaking is, it's a sort of like an antidote for a kind of mood that can creep in, at least in my experience, the moment I encounter my first obstacle. And sometimes that's something that happens in the day, like swimming. Sometimes I wake up into it. I've had a nightmare or something, and I'm convinced. And it's a reminder that to me, that the small moves we have to make to pay attention to our way of making sense of the world at each one of these moments, at each end of the lane, are a kind of a continued kind of paying attention, a continued kind of caretaking that's really important to get into, lest we end up asleep in the midst of a story kind of pretty much of our own making that is deeply unhelpful to our being of service and of being present and of being kind to ourselves, let alone anyone else.
Yeah, I think what I most appreciate, and I'm feeling it really directly now, is how, each one of those things, Justin, of the, person going too slow, or you're going too slow, or whatever the thing is, the trigger that has us feel like we're in the way, or we're stopped, or there's some obstacle. This poem feels to me like a reminder, like an invitation to remember that it's our interpretation that's having it be that way. And it's funny, there's something about obstacles, like things getting in my way, that, where the day doesn't go my way, or my life's not going my way. That my is like a small my, like, like the big I and the little I of self. And I'm feeling invited into the bigger my of my life, the more universal self, where it says that if something's in your way, it's going your way. And I guess it's kind of pointing a little bit back into that paradoxical feeling where maybe going around the houses when you just want to get from A to B brings something really important that life is asking us to encounter or learn, that we wouldn't otherwise receive if we went quickly from A to B. If we were left to do our 36 furious laps, how might life be stripped of its richness that's destined for us? And yet, much of the time we're fighting against, because we've deemed something an obstacle, there's something to fight against, and it might just be something different than what we're interpreting it to be. And I'm so appreciative of this invitation, this varied invitation of all the different stories and imagery that comes up through swimming these lanes in this poem, and appreciating the nature of, for example, the it might be annoying now, but who knows what this will mean for the future, with the boy on the boat with the champagne and his capacity to pop up like a cork even though he's been bashed off a boat. And our annoyance at him being in the way for learning how to breathe once he's popped up from underwater pales into insignificance when it means that he might be able to survive later on. And in the moment, we could be that person. We could be the irritated person who just feels everything is getting in the way and everyone needs to get out of my way. I experience this like when I'm commuting, for example, and I'm walking out of Waterloo Station. And just where I turn out of the ticket barriers, there's an escalator that comes up. And this whole stream of people sometimes is coming towards me. And I'm thinking, everyone really does need to get out of my way. This is terrible. It's like being kind of a fish swimming in the wrong direction when all the other fish are coming towards me. And and it's so interesting to feel that, I guess it's like an underlying need for flow. We have this kind of underlying wish for smoothness and ease. And so all these difficulties feel like such an insult, such a frustration. And it's so easy to forget that we have agency within that the way I'm interpreting those other commuters determines my experience of them. And I'm certainly in those moments not flowing like a minnow through the gaps. I'm like, the gap, I can't even see the gaps. I can just see the obstacles, which I guess is a consequence of seeing obstacles, is that they're what you see because you are defining them that way.
I think that this last point you're raising is really important because, when we're traveling on the train and there's a huge crowd of people, our physical form doesn't allow us to transmute into a minnow and dart, much as we might wish. I could sort of shapeshift and then be very tiny and find my way through. That's not available. So what is it that's being called on, that Alison Luterman is calling on here, is an act of imagination on our part. And it's not an act of imagination that I imagine myself getting through the crowd. It's more like an act of imagination that radically reinterprets what I'm in the middle of. And you said something, Lizzie, about, you drew attention to this part about 36 furious laps. And there's something that I think so many of us really deeply struggle with. I mean, this is certainly a really deep, big, often suffering-laden mess of contradictions in my own life that I feel like I'm working with again and again and again, which is the sense that by now I ought to be here. And it can show up in swimming. I'm going to do 36 lengths and I've got 27 minutes, and by 27 minutes I have to have done 36 lengths. There's that. But I think there's a much more profound and important one, which is it's my birthday. It's my 48th birthday this coming week. By my 48th birthday, my life ought to be this shape and in this way. And in any way, if it's not that shape or in that way, is down to either my own inadequacy or all these obstacles that are in my way. And it's the same move. But one of the things that it does that's no different from standing on the tube platform and feeling despairing at the crowds that are getting in the way is it's been occurring to me more and more. Not only does it get me frightened, sad sometimes, angry, all of those things, all of which are so inappropriate, really. It also, when I live that way, stops me from noticing what's right here. So this point that she makes, which is if it's an obstacle, it's going your way, is the young woman with a tattoo and the man flailing around like a horse with a spear in his side and the gaggle of people chatting by the side of the pool. They are all life too. They're not, to make any of them into an obstacle. So to make whatever questions I have about the work that I'm doing, or challenges and difficulties that I or people in my family are facing, or friends, or, you know, to make any of that into an obstacle is to separate it from life, rather than to encounter it as part of the flow of life to be encountered. And it may be that there's action to take, or it may be that there's sadness to feel, and tenderness or joy, but none of it's separate. And if we're bold enough to understand that, I think sometimes we think that we're meant to be God. So I'm meant to know what's happening, and I'm meant to have unlimited power over what's happening. And because I'm not, I somehow I'm falling short. That's the sort of comparison standard that we make. There's something so generous and humbling about, here I am, swimming in the midst of my life, filled with apparent obstacles, real things in my way. Can I just let myself be in this? And not all the time imagine that I'm somehow meant to be out of it already, or meant to have won it by now, or meant to win it ever. So I don't know what kind of sense that's making to you, but anyway, that's the dynamic, it seems to me, that's at play, at least in my own life as I read this.
Yeah, and I think, you know, for me, Justin, I remember even when I was little, I had a friend whose brother was a couple of years older than us. And I remember thinking, oh my God, to be 13, I mean, that is the pinnacle of everything I can imagine that's great about being a human being, is to be 13. Because this girl's brother was 13, he was so cool. And I think that kind of setup that happens, you know, even with a really young person, about when I get to 13, like, I'm gonna basically rule the whole roost, you know, that kind of feeling of like, oh, I'm gonna have some power, I'm gonna have some agency. And then I remember thinking, well, when I'm 17, my goodness, and I can drive a car, the world is my oyster at 17. Like, oh my goodness. And in each point I arrived, and still continue to arrive at these points, and look around and go, oh, this is not the kind of kingdom, you know, that I envisaged. This is not I haven't got the thing I think I thought I would have. I'm not the kind of person I thought I would be. The circumstances aren't the circumstances I thought they might be. I haven't got as much money as I thought I would have. I haven't got the relationship that I thought I might be in. You know, all of these things. So when you said, like, I'm going to be 48 next week and I'm 38 next month, and this whole thing about when I'm at that point, there are all these conditions. It's such a kind of brutalizing, and such a big piece of acceptance each time to reach a destination that you had high hopes for, and realize that the destination does not have the thing that you thought it would. And that can happen, you know, it's not just an age thing, it's like in all directions. And we can have it on behalf of other people, like our kids, like, oh, well, by the time they're 10, they should be sleeping in their own bedroom or something, you know, all these standards. And I'm feeling in this moment, as you were saying that, like the kind of brutality that is on a life, to have all this conditionality and these expectations and these demands that is all set up by our own internal projections and systems, that perpetuates this feeling of not enoughness and not good enough. And we do that in forgetting what this poem's inviting us to, which is that wherever we are, whatever's happening is life itself. And a way to be is to encounter it and welcome it all. And that's a whole different way of living than trying to deliver on a load of imagined demands that we've made up because of our conditioning and because of our cultural norms and because of probably our dads and our mums and our aunties and uncles and brothers and sisters and, you know, friends and colleagues, and all the imagined strangers on Instagram that we think, oh, well, you know, look at that person who's this and I'm not. And it's if we're not careful, it's like that becomes a really big part of being a person, is not never living up to anything. The imagined, it's like the tyranny of the imagined self somehow. And that feels really tender to me, and really kind of, oh, I can see all the ways I'm actually kind of, yeah, like hurting myself almost for not being what I think I should be, or where I think I should be, with what I think I should have, and with whom. And yeah, it feels really sad that we're up to that with ourselves.
It is. And a part of the frame here that I'm appreciating from what you're bringing in, and also from what's in the poem, is when we live life as if it were a race or a game to win, then every moment in our life is compared with our sense of having won it, or in one way or another, did I swim the laps at the speed that I wanted to, and now I've lost because all of these people are in my way? Or is my life the way I imagined it would be or should be at the time and at the age that I am? Yeah. And to live that way is to, and this is the genius of this part in the poem about the young boy who's learning how to hold his breath underwater, is when we live our lives that way and we look back even on what happened 5 minutes ago or 5 years ago, it all adds up in our minds to a story about how we failed to beat things, or how we beat the world in order to get where we wanted to be.
Yeah.
So that makes the past, what that does is it makes the past into something that always points in a particular direction. Like it's towards here, and we measure the past against it.
Yeah.
But another whole way of being in it, which I think is really hard for most of us, mostly because we haven't learned how to be in the world this way, is to see everything that happens now as a way of retelling what happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
The past wasn't what I took it to be. It's actually been pointing into a new and unfolding possibility that I could never have imagined, that's right here. Mm-hmm. So that way the past, you see, the past isn't like, what the past means is no longer something that's given. Mm-hmm. The past then can change as things happen. So it turns out that this young boy is learning, he's in my way now, because years from now, something's going to happen that this is going to call on. And I probably won't be there to know it, but it means that what I've taken this immediate 5 seconds ago to mean could be radically different from what I imagine. And when we can feel that, yeah, and I wonder how we learn to feel that, but when we can feel that, we can free ourselves from this, like you're saying, this punishing constraint that we have to compare every moment in time with this imagined, this story that has been totally made up, because every story is made up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, Justin, because I've often felt really confused about this whole, in certain aspects of healing, there's this notion that retroactively things shift. And right now I'm feeling quite clear on that in the way that you described it, which is that in this moment, as I look back, it's possible to find a different meaning than what I found in the moment then, if I'm reflecting backwards in my life. And I think that's a really big thing, to accept that the way we're interpreting now of this moment will shift as we go through life and we look back, and the meaning will shift. And on one level, it confirms that we are the meaning makers. And if it's possible that an interpretation of a moment could be different in any way at all, then it kind of confirms that there's no absolute reality of something, but all that there is our interpretation of it, which feels really empowering and brings possibility, where sometimes it feels like, well, this is just the fact of it. I can find myself going, well, no, this is the facts. Let's just look at the facts here and get really kind of sure about something. And in that moment, it can be so easy to forget that I'm making it the way that it is, rather than it being some fixed thing that I'm determined is the way that it is. A little bit like, we say, well, I am the way that I am. I mean, we are the biggest interpreters of ourselves. And it's a little bit like, and this is a kind of really trivial example in some ways, but like when I remember seeing pictures of myself and thinking, oh my God, I look awful or something, giving myself a really hard time. And then a few years later, I look back at that picture again and I don't think the same thing of myself. Even just with like image and what my body's like, what my face is like, what I'm like in a picture. And it feels like in some way that's a little example that I have that shows me that I shift, my perception shifts of myself. And when I look back, it's very different to the way that I'm seeing myself now.
I think one more thing that I have in mind to say is there's the stories that we tell about ourselves. So there's this hope and this possibility you talk about, Lizzie, which is that we will look back and we'll see that there's a different story as possible, and that opens up the possibility for us that a different story is possible now. And I think that's often an enormously healing, life-giving possibility that's really worth us attending to. But there's a much more radical possibility in play here, which this part of the poem about the boy who's going to survive the tsunami that hits the wedding boat is that we'll never know. Mm-hmm. We'll never know how the story is going to be different. And that then opens up a whole other kind of discipline that we can start to bring into life, which is, can I let go of my need to have a story that's coherent, that will make me feel better, and still live? Can I pay attention to what's here without getting caught up in my certainty, without having to have another kind of certainty that will be a better one?
Yeah.
So, and I think this is really hard for all of us to do this, but it's also necessary, and it's deep in the wisdom that comes from many traditions of paying attention to this moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And also to not make that a tyranny as well.
Well, that's like, right. Exactly.
Finding myself completely in the story and completely sucked in, and then knowing that I shouldn't be doing that, and then giving myself a hard time for having completely got taken by my story, but right. It's like a gentle reminder, like a gentle coming back.
That's so brilliant, because of course, yes, even the sort of sanctimonious way that we can get into, I am the one who's paying attention to the present moment, and like beating ourselves up for having that's another way of having obstacles.
Yeah.
So we can't. I think the really good news about this is that we can't escape. I heard someone in a workshop recently saying that she'd been doing her best to live her life as if there was no story, and the very, very wise person who was running the workshop said, that's just another story. It's another way to assess yourself again and again and again about having a meaningful life. Now I'm the one who can live as if there's no story. It's the same thing. It's another way of inventing obstacles. So we can't escape it, which is why these lines at the end are so brilliant. If something is in your way, it is going your way. The way of all beings, and this is the best bit, I think, towards darkness and towards light.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh God, I just have to say one more thing, which is that I've been reading Richard Raw recently, and seems to be the same kind of thing as his darkness and light thing, which is that he says most people are living in a way where they are in denial about the fact that there is suffering included in being a human being. And because we're in resistance to accepting that there is suffering, we live in all kinds of ways that create a different kind of suffering that's not a deep suffering. It's a kind of, and of course it is deep too, but it's not the suffering of just being human, of just a general insecurity of being a human being. But we do all these things to protect ourselves, to defend, to, promote ourselves, to look good, all as layers and layers and layers upon layers, like in not considering the depth of the natural suffering of being a human being. And I think that's what you're kind of saying with this story thing. It's like this pain or suffering or difficulty, it is just part of being a human being. And we can't swim it away with 36 furious laps or a huge big to-do list or our judgments of people or hanging on to loads of stuff or whatever our strategies are. We're not going to make this go away. It's just not going to happen. And yet we've got all these strategies to kind of push it away or push it down or deny it or something. And so I'm feeling relief in this moment in the words of like, just accepting that it hurts a lot to be a person. And from there, a different kind of freedom might arise than just being in my compensatory trying for something else to be here.
Well, I think that's really beautiful, important place for us to end. I want to say thank you as always to you, Lizzie, that we get to do this. This is a extraordinary practice, and thank you to everyone who found your way to this conversation, either when it happened live or later. We're really glad to have you with us.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here and to be in the conversation. It's really healing, as always, to be in the conversation, and also feels like a return to something every time we speak like this and include other people.